In the middle of the 5th century, the Roman Empire was crumbling. Nearly all of northern Italy had fallen to the Huns, and in the south, not even the eternal city of Rome was safe. It was in the wake of this apocalypse that Venice was born. I'm Griffin Johnson, the armchair historian, coming to you in an actual armchair, and today we'll be discussing how Venice was able to establish itself as a trade empire that retained a republican system of government for much of its existence. But first, I'm pleased to announce that today's video is sponsored by Banknote World, an online collectible currency company that boasts a wide array of international currency dating all the way back to the 1800s. They actually sent me some Italian lire from 1985, which you can see here. I've got a specific tracking link in the description below. You should definitely check them out. Now on to the video. In the year 452, the Huns began their invasion of the Italian peninsula. The northern Adriatic coast would become a refuge for many Italian inlanders fleeing Attila. Due to the absence of fertile soil, these refugees learned to live off the sea, and eventually entire communities of fishermen and salt miners dotted the coastline. These lagoon dwellers all agreed to band together for mutual protection against the Huns, Goths, and later Lombards. Approximately 300 years after Attila's death, when the political situation in Italy had calmed, the Venetians convened and chose a leader, Orso Ipito. Orso and many of his successors would align themselves with Byzantium, the eastern remnants of the Roman Empire, in order to obtain protection against the ever-encroaching Lombards. However, when the Lombards were conquered by the Franks nearly 50 years later, some Venetians began to consider seeking protection from Charlemagne instead. These overtures fell short, however, and Charlemagne's son Pepin launched an invasion of Venice, prompting the Venetians to relocate to the Rialto Islands. In Thomas F. Madden's book, Venice, A New History, he describes how the Venetians employed every defense against the Franks that their watery fortress could offer. Their actions alone made it impossible for Pepin's forces to penetrate the interior of the lagoon. Pepin would withdraw from his invasion after his men started dying from disease. Doge Agnello Participazio came to power a year later and ordered the construction of a new capital for the region of Rialto. Venice's good fortune continued when the Franks and the Byzantines signed an agreement in 814 that recognized Venetian independence. Venice was now looked upon as a promising link between the East and the West. Over time, a Venetian identity began to form, and in 1032, Doge Domenico Flabenico had drained the Venetian swamp, so to speak, and popular elections were restored, albeit limited to an exclusive assortment of Rialtan nobles. During this time, the relationship between Venice and the Byzantine Empire became increasingly cordial, as Venice reinforced Byzantium's naval defenses and Sicilian holdings. In return, Venice's merchants were exempt from customs dues, and a commercial quarter was established in Constantinople, allowing them to trade grain and wine from Italy, salt from Venice's inland territory, and wood and slaves from Dalmatia in exchange for silks and spices that the Byzantines had access to in the Near East. Venice's rapid rise in these years can be directly attributed to the spice trade. As Venetian trade ambitions expanded, relations between the increasingly arrogant Venetian merchants and the Byzantines slowly decayed. These tensions reached a tipping point during the Fourth Crusade, when Venice, under the nearly blind 96-year-old Doge Enrico Dandolo, took part in the sacking of the Byzantine capital, Constantinople. In Colin Thubron's book, The Venetians, he writes, "The conquest of 1204 had far-reaching and enduring consequences for Venice. Dandolo had won some important concessions, and had acquired for the Republic the entire western coastline of Greece, plus the port of Gallipoli, and the wealthy Thracian city of Adrianople. Not to mention, the Venetians got their hand on untold amounts of ancient relics and riches from plundering Constantinople." During the rest of the 13th century, Venice eclipsed its Genoan and Pisan rivals by cementing its supremacy in the spice trade and securing a trade agreement with the Mamluks, who had recaptured their holdings lost to the Crusades. The year 1453 marked the rise of yet another Islamic empire, and the Venetians saw their opportunity to further capitalize in the region. They secured trading rights with the Ottoman Empire, the same civilization that dealt Venice's former benefactor, Byzantium, its killing blow. However, this relationship would deteriorate just as it did with the Byzantines, causing the Ottomans to cut off Venice's access to the Black Sea, and upon taking over Egypt in 1517, Sultan Selim I further alienated Venice by imposing restrictions on Venetian trade in Alexandria, leading to a significant reduction in spice imports to the island state. From that point on, the Ottomans usurped Venice's role as the leader of the spice trade, forcing Venice to look for an alternative enterprise. Luckily, in 1492, Spain triumphed over Granada and opened up the West Mediterranean to the Atlantic. This would prompt Venice to further cultivate trade connections with northern European principalities under the Holy Roman Empire, especially with Flanders. Being deprived of spice imports, more Venetian merchants also devoted their efforts to trading with Germany, acquiring metal products that they would trade throughout the Mediterranean world. By the 16th century, Venice reached its peak in both population and per capita income, but by the 17th century, Dutch merchants, benefiting from the New World markets, became more influential than those of Venice in European trade. Now that we've addressed the overview of the history of Venice up until the 17th century, let's determine what aspects of Venice's unique government and society allowed it to assert control over the Mediterranean trade. To begin with, Venice was a republic in a feudal world, dominated by noble and royal dynasties. Although Venice did spread its influence through some territorial expansion, most Venetians devoted their efforts to competing for new markets and trade agreements as opposed to militaristic conquest. Many doges, especially during Venice's early history, tried to establish their own ruling dynasties, but the individualistic spirit of the Venetian masses persisted. Therefore, the doge's powers were severely checked by an assembly of nobles that consisted of Venice's wealthiest merchant elite. Partly as a result of these policies, Venice built up an impressive navy to safeguard and propagate its interests. The Venetian Arsenal, a public shipyard constructed in 1104, provided thousands of Venetians with jobs, and migrant workers were also contracted. No other medieval state had nearly as many trading connections as Venice did. Although most were involved in the arsenal or spice trade, some Venetians found work as silk makers and glassblowers, earning continental acclaim for their lavish and decorative products. Mosaicists and woodcarvers also plied their trade internationally by decorating the interiors of cathedrals and palaces throughout Europe. In the realm of banking, Venice introduced a government-controlled bond market in the 1200s, and in the 1500s Venice began to sell tax-free bonds on the open market. In a way, the Renaissance had started much earlier for Venice, as its people perpetually saw themselves as the forefather of ancient Rome. Like ancient Rome, they certainly left their mark on Western civilization. As I mentioned before, our friends over at Banknote World are sponsoring today's episode, so please click the link in the description below and check out everything they have to offer. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank my general staff on Patreon: John Graham, James Thompson, Derek Bello, Kelvin Rulaine, Kevin Bertram, Jim Talbot, Dimitri Stillerman, Jeff Antolik, Patrick Reardon, Joe Crispin, Emmanuel Kang, Ademski, and everyone else listed on screen. I'd also like to thank those working on the Armchair History team for making this video possible. Thanks again, see you next time with the part 2 of the Anglo-Zulu War.